To create a Logic session that includes a sampler, we're going to start with a blank session, and I'll just sort of show you a few options. We have many plugins down here in the EMS, so what you'll do is you'll set up a session with a software instrument. Hit create. And in that instrument, we're going to set our output to stereo. Just stereo is fine. And that instrument, we're going to select an instrument here in this drop-down menu here. And the sampler that comes with Logic is here. It's the EXS24 sampler. It's in this particular version of Logic, it looks like this. And to load a sample into this object or this plugin, we're going to go to Edit, this tiny Edit button here. And then we get our zone menu here. So I'm going to go to Finder, and I'm going to look in the Documents folder for my package of samples here. And I've trimmed out the Firebird hit like we did in class the other day. We're going to drag the Firebird hit into our zone, and therefore we will be able to trigger that sample by playing a key on our MIDI controller. Right, notice that when I press middle C, it shows up on my keyboard controller. I get feedback here too as well. And I can adjust parts of this to change the sound. I can change the release time so it sounds more natural. Okay, I could change filter settings here. If I want to change the tuning or adjust the LFO in some way or apply an LFO to different parts of this instrument, I can do that. Now, when I go down here, I can also create a sequence down here in my editor where I'm able to write notes into a timeline and sequence my MIDI in this way. This is a basic sampler. If I wanted to create a whole bunch of layers of zones, I can do so here by setting the key range here by changing, if I wanted just the orchestra hit on a certain note or a certain range of notes, I could do that like we were doing with our drum sampler before. I could bring in multiple samples from my menu here and load in all kinds of things from the Documents folder, samples 21, 808 samples. So if I wanted snare and kick and closed hi-hat, for instance, like we did in class, I would drag that over to my zones and they would all be here. So I can see that is going to be closed hi-hat is C2, I think, which is way down here. My kick drum has been assigned to C#2, and my snare drum is here. We can assign zones in this way. Okay, so that's your basic sampler. Other sampler instruments, here, let me save this. And that means that if I wanted to recall or reload that sampler instrument, I could go over here to this menu and find it from this drop-down menu, or go to Find and find the sampler instrument you create. On this instrument, I can then apply effects down here. Delay, all kinds of things can be applied to this sound now. To make it more interesting. Other instruments that you might want to choose in this particular program are found here. So I'm going to go over here to my instrument browser. Alchemy is okay. And let me choose that and show you what it does. It's a multi-sampler. It allows you to work with different kinds of layers. So each layer has 4 layers possible, and I can load different things into each layer. And I can use these XY joystick-like these joystick-like controls to make interesting sounds. I can alter the parameters of everything here. Notice that it has the same kinds of parameters as our Moog or any other hardware synth. Other synths that might be fun are down here in the AU Instruments folder in Native Instruments, Absinthe. It will pop up here in a second. It has to take time to load. And Absinthe is fun because it shows you the patch. And you can build your patch from any of these things. So let me go to, let me load some interesting thing. I'm going to choose so it'll show you the patch. So it has multiple layers that you can alter and engage or disengage. And it creates a very interesting, complex sound. So Absinthe, again, is down here in the AU Instruments, Native Instruments, and that's Absinthe. One more that you might like is down here in AU Instruments, Native Instruments, and the Contact Player is also very good. Contact Player has a menu from which you can select your things. So I went over to Libraries, and the Giant is pretty great. If you double click that library, it'll load it into this user thing over here. And it gives you lots of different options of how to basically trigger different samples. So this is a way to trigger samples. You can set the room size, the amount of reverb, and note that as you drag samples into this row or this column, it'll assign them to different channels. So basically, if you need to put in a new one, you'd have to take the old one out by clicking that tiny X. And we're going to say no. You can, of course, bring in the strings here, or other sort of instrumental samples. So that'll get you started on some of these samplers that we have available to us in the EMS. And this is going to just take its time. So, oh, there we go. So that's a note sample of your strings, which is not quite as interesting as some of the maybe the other instruments. Again, notice that so this is an emulator of a retro. So okay, so please let me know if you have questions.